Welcome to Professor Wright. You have a voice. Let's find it. And welcome back to Professor Wright. I am the Professor, D.A. Adams. Glad to have you back here for video number 9. And as we continue on with the writing process, we've concluded pre-writing, and now we're moving on up into the writing stage of the writing process. Now, if you remember back early on in this lecture series, I mentioned when we were going over the different stages of the writing process that if you had done a good job in pre-writing, this stage would be the easiest, and that is true. But it is also the most time-consuming, and it is one where you will have to spend most of your time. But if you have good pre-writing and you have a good informal outline and lots of notes to look back on and draw from, you don't have to worry about coming up with ideas. You already have them. Now you just have to put them into a shape. Now, before we get started, I don't know if it's still taught the same way as it was when I was in school, and that's been a few years. Things have changed and times have changed. But I know for me, back in the day, a lot of English teachers taught English with a mentality that you had to do it correctly the first time, every single time. Everything had to be perfect and flawless every time you sat down to write anything. Now, as you hear those words, I really hope that your crap detector goes off, because there is no way to get things perfect in writing the first time, every time when you sit down. As a matter of fact, I'll go so far as to say you will never get it perfect the first time, anytime. That is a huge myth that exists in the minds of certain English teachers. And if you are one of those English teachers listening to this, hear me now. That is a terrible way to approach teaching writing, because that kills people's creativity and it kills people's desire to want to try to write, because it creates a lot of undue and unnecessary stress on them that makes it harder for them to sit down and get their ideas to come out. And hopefully, in this video, I can get you to see that there is a better way to sit down and get your ideas to flow. The first step in that is accepting that your first draft is a rough draft. It is going to have mistakes in it. You will always have mistakes in your rough draft. You cannot help it. There are lots of different kinds of mistakes that you may end up having in your rough draft. I'm going to highlight 3 major ones that are potential. This is not a catch-all list, but it does give you a good idea of what I'm talking about as far as you cannot not have mistakes in your rough draft. The most common kind of mistakes that you're going to have when it comes to your rough draft are typos. You're going to mistype a word as you try to get it down. I have a common one that I do. I know how to spell the word work. W-O-R-K. I've been spelling that word since I was probably 6 years old, maybe younger than that even. I know how to spell it, but when I go to type it, a lot of times it comes out W-R-O-K. Don't know what happens, but with my fingers, for some reason, I hit the R before the O almost every single time. Now, if I sat there and worried about that typo and let that bother me, it would disrupt the flow of my writing. But I'm aware that I'm going to make that mistake, so I don't stress about it. The next kind of error that you can have in your rough draft is what's known as writer-based prose. This is a mark of a rough draft, a first draft. You know what you meant to say. You know what you wanted to say. But the writing that is there really is only clear to you as the writer. Let me give you an example of that. This sentence here, it is special to me. Well, to me, I know what I'm saying. I know what that sentence means. But you as the reader have no idea what I'm trying to convey there. Rough drafts will be full of this kind of writing, this writer-based prose that has some kind of indefinite pronoun in it that makes the sentence unclear. But getting that idea down and having it on the page is really important. You can go back and alter that later and get it right, turn it into what's called reader-based prose, but a lot of times you have to go through the writer-based prose to get to the reader-based prose. So that's another example of an error that you're going to have in your rough drafts that are unavoidable. The next kind of a mistake is not really a mistake, but it can be construed as one. Writing is an act of discovery. And that means that as you're writing, you learn things and figure things out that you didn't know before. Well, if you figure out in paragraph 3 that something has changed from the beginning, the stuff that you wrote in paragraphs 1 and 2 potentially could be wrong, and they need to be fixed. They need to be changed. Writing is an act of discovery, and you're going to write things early on that end up being a mistake. There's a great book called The Well. It's an Australian fiction book. And I can't remember the author's name now. I'll look it up maybe and put it on the website. But in The Well, it's a story of a woman, and she adopts this young lady, and somehow a man threatens to disrupt their lives, and so they kill him and bury him in the well. And that's the basic premise of the story. But the writer, this was back in the days of typewriters, about 3/4 of the way through the manuscript, she realized that the older woman wore a leg brace and had worn it her entire life. She hadn't realized that discovery came upon her that far into the book. And she had to go back and rewrite the entire first 3/4 of the book to get that leg brace in there. And she only needed to mention it 3 or 4 times in the first 3/4 of the book, but it needed to be there. It couldn't just suddenly magically appear 3/4 of the way through, because this was a major characteristic of her personality, that she had worn this leg brace her whole life. That's an example of the act of discovery, of figuring things out about your own writing that you didn't know in the beginning. It happens in essays all the time. I could give you dozens of examples of that, but for time's sake, I'm not going to. Just believe me when I tell you that you are going to write things in your early paragraphs that later on you look back on and go, I don't believe that anymore. I need to fix that. So those are all ways that your first draft is going to be a rough draft. So knowing that you're going to make those kinds of mistakes, knowing that you are incapable of getting it perfect the first time, every time, relax. Don't worry about making those mistakes. It's okay. You can go back and polish them out later. Relax. Let your ideas flow. This is extremely important because most writer's block comes from anxiety. And if you're sitting there stressing about, oh gosh, I hope I don't have a typo, you're putting undue stress on yourself, and you're increasing the odds that you're going to jam up and not be able to produce whatever it is you're trying to come up with. Relax. Just get your ideas down. Let them flow. If nothing will come to you, type that sentence. Nothing will come to me right now. I wonder why. And keep typing. And eventually the ideas will start flowing. And it doesn't matter that you don't need those first 2 or 3 sentences there. All they're doing is priming the pump. For you, the most important thing is getting those ideas flowing. Now, if you've got good pre-writing, you know what you want to say. Now it's just a matter of putting it into sentences. But sometimes if you're sitting there stressing and worried about, oh God, am I going to get this right? Am I going to get this right? You will freeze up and not be able to get anything to come out. So just relax. Don't worry about making mistakes. It's going to be wrong to begin with. Accept that fact, and then just get the ideas going. Another reason, or I guess a better explanation for why worry and anxiety and stressing about making mistakes will kill your creative juices has to do with short-term memory. Your short-term memory is a lot like the RAM in a computer. And if you've ever had a bunch of programs running at once on a computer, you know that once the RAM gets full, once the RAM reaches its capacity, everything shuts down. Everything completely stops. The computer freezes for a few seconds, slows way down on everything until it can free up enough of that short-term memory, the random access memory, to start processing programs again. The exact same thing happens in your brain. If you're sitting there thinking too much about whether or not you're going to make mistakes, you cannot come up with new sentences, because it already takes quite a bit of your short-term memory just to go through the physical process of writing, turning letters into words, words into sentences, and then finding some way, either typing with your fingers or writing with a pen, to translate those thoughts into something that is a written form that comes out on either a piece of paper or on a computer screen. All of that takes physical short-term memory. If you were sitting there stressing out about it, you're not going to have anything left to think with. So just relax. Just get your thoughts down. That is the most important part. This is going to be the stage of the process that takes the most amount of time, but it should not be the most stressful part. This should be the part where you just kick back, get your thoughts down, have fun, and enjoy it. Now, if you accept that the first draft is a rough draft, then you also accept that you will find and fix the errors when you get to rewriting. That's very important. You are, in effect, entering into a contract with yourself that you are relaxing during this stage, but you will pay closer attention in the next stage. You will find and fix all of these little problems that you have once you get to that point. That is an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, is that yes, you have license to write whatever you want to write when you're putting this thing together, but you are also going to enforce on yourself that you will go back and work on it more, that you're not going to leave it in that rough form. So the most important thing that I can say to you is, as you sit down to write, just write. Do not stress about it. Do not worry about it. Let the ideas flow. Okay, so that brings us up to fish cabinet number 5. I want you to think about a time when you suffered from writer's block. In 2 well-developed paragraphs, please explain what you think caused it and how you managed to overcome it. All right, so that's going to bring us to the end of video number 9. Thank you for joining me again. I am the Professor D.A. Adams, and I look forward to seeing you on video number 10, where we're going to get into the next thing that I want you to pay attention to in the writing stage of the writing process, but I'm going to save that until we get to it. So for now, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.